There it was, a single red scarf twisted in the snow, half buried, barely visible to anyone, except Rex. Once a decorated canine officer, now retired and graying, Rex was simply supposed to be out on a walk with his former handler. But the moment he saw that flash of color in the white, something primal awakened. He pulled hard toward the backyard fence, ears forward, body tense. Something was wrong. Beneath that snow lay more than just frost. Edna, 82, had collapsed just minutes earlier behind her home. No one saw, no one heard, no one but Rex. And time was running out. If he was right, if she was still alive, he would have to act now, even if it meant risking everything. But what happens when a retired dog decides his job is not finished? Like, share, subscribe, and comment where you're listening from. We'd love to know. There it was, a single red scarf twisted in the snow, half buried, barely visible to anyone, except Rex. Once a decorated canine officer, now just a dog with silver on his muzzle, Rex had been enjoying the simplest things these days. Walks with Paul, quiet naps by the fire. Retirement was calm, slower, kinder. But instinct never retires. When Rex caught a glimpse of that scarf, his entire body stiffened. One paw forward, nose low, his breath clouded in the frosty air. He knew. Paul had taken Rex out like usual that late afternoon. The wind sharp, the streets nearly empty. Snowflakes drifted lazily down as the sky dulled to slate. The leash hung loosely in Paul's hand. Rex never strayed far. But that moment changed everything. Without warning, Rex surged ahead, dragging Paul a few stumbling steps before stopping, rigid, near a side gate. His ears were locked forward, his tail frozen still. He stared into the yard. Paul squinted through the chain link. It looked like an ordinary backyard. Patchy snow, an old patio chair, bare garden beds. But Rex wasn't looking at the yard. He was fixated on something small, something crimson, peeking out from a drift near the corner of the fence. The red scarf. Paul's heart sank. He recognized that scarf. It belonged to Edna, the elderly woman who lived alone in that house. Quiet lady. Still shoveled her walkway even at 82. Baked cookies for the neighborhood kids. But her house looked dim now. Curtains drawn, no footprints. And that scarf, it shouldn't be out here. Rex let out a short, clipped bark. Not loud, not for show. A working bark, a signal. Paul felt his stomach knot. He had heard that sound in another lifetime. During search missions, disaster zones, hostage calls. He had not heard it in years. Rex was calling it now. Paul vaulted the fence. Snow crunched underfoot as he rushed toward the scarf. His boots sank into the soft drift. "Edna?" he called, already knowing the answer. No voice replied. Just the wind moving through bare branches above. Rex paced the edge of the fence, tail slicing the air, eyes never leaving Paul. Paul reached the scarf and froze. It wasn't just a scarf. It was wrapped around a shoulder. Edna lay curled against the wall of her house, her body half covered in snow. Her skin looked far too pale, her lips tinged blue. One hand still clutched a small mail bundle. The mailbox was open. She had tried to get back in, and she hadn't made it. Paul dropped to his knees, pulling off his jacket. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse. Faint. Thready. But there. "Hang on, Edna," he muttered, already digging for his phone. No signal. Of course not. This stretch always dropped out. He turned toward the fence. "Rex!" Rex was already gone. Paul looked back down at Edna, then toward the road. Rex had bolted. Where was he going? And would he come back in time? Rex had not run like this in years. His paws slammed into the powder, legs churning, chest heaving with breath. as the cold stung his nose and ears. But he did not stop. He could not. Every part of his body had awakened. The memory of missions, of urgency, of lives depending on him. He had heard Paul's voice. He had seen Edna. And he understood. It was up to him now. The leash had snapped loose when Paul jumped the fence, and Rex tore through the neighborhood, past leafless trees and shuttered windows. He weaved through backyards, cutting corners like he used to during foot pursuits. He still knew the fastest way back, his mind focused not on the pain in his joints, nor the frost in his fur, only the need to reach help. Back on the main road, a mail truck had just turned the corner. It hummed steadily, brakes hissing as it slowed near a cul-de-sac. Inside sat Jerome, the regular carrier. He knew the residents, waved to their dogs. But as he reached for the next bundle, something slammed against the side of his truck. Jerome flinched. A dog? Rex stood there, pawing frantically at the door, barking sharp and urgent. Not the bark of a stray. Not aggression, just pure intent. He darted in front of the truck, then back to the sidewalk, then back again, eyes locking with Jerome's. Jerome cracked the door, heart racing. The dog barked once, then ran. Stopped. Looked back. Ran again. Jerome hesitated only a second before grabbing his phone and stepping out. Paul, still beside Edna, had taken off his own sweater and tucked it around her. Her breathing was shallow, her eyes barely opened. He whispered gently, rubbing her hands, trying to keep her awake. The snow was falling heavier now. 5 minutes had passed, then 7. Still no help. He pressed his phone again. No bars. He cursed. Come on, Rex. The memory came sharp and sudden. Rex, years ago, on a missing child call. The boy had fallen into a ravine. The team could not find him. Rex had. He had led them back, barking, pacing, waiting. He had never failed. Paul gritted his teeth. You still got it in you, boy. And then, around the fence, came the sound. Feet in snow, a sliding gate, boots stomping. And then a voice. Hey, you okay? Jerome stumbled through the yard, Rex behind him, tongue lolling, chest heaving with exertion. Paul waved him over. She's alive. Barely. Call it in. Now! Jerome already had his phone out. He hit the emergency number. Elderly woman down, unconscious, barely breathing, backyard of 1437 Sycamore. Possible hypothermia. Send everything! Rex stood between them, his body shaking with fatigue, his eyes never leaving Edna. The red scarf had come loose now, fluttering faintly in the breeze. Paul looked at Rex, then at Jerome. She was out here for a while, Paul murmured. If he hadn't seen that scarf, Rex slowly lay down beside Edna, placing his head on her shoulder, the way he had once been trained to do with trauma victims. He had not forgotten. But as sirens began to wail in the distance, a new fear settled in Paul's chest. They were not out of the woods yet. What if they were already too late? The sound of sirens cut through the stillness like a blade. First a faint wail in the distance, then louder, closer, echoing through the quiet neighborhood. Paul stood up and waved toward the road, the red of his cheeks raw against the cold. Every second felt like a thread slipping through his fingers. Edna was no longer shivering. That terrified him most. Jerome paced near the gate, keeping the line open. Yes, backyard access is through the alley. She's not responsive. Yeah. He's still with her. The dog. Yeah. A canine. Paul knelt again beside Edna, pressing 2 fingers to her neck. The pulse was weaker, her breaths shorter. Stay with me, he whispered. Don't let go now. Not after all this. Beside them, Rex did not move. His eyes were trained on Edna's face, his head still resting on her shoulder. Snow collected lightly on his back, but he did not shake it off. He was anchoring her. That was what they trained him to do. But no one had told him to do it now. This came from something deeper. The paramedics arrived fast, A blur of red jackets, clinking gear, urgent voices. They spilled into the yard like water, assessing, checking vitals, moving with precision. One of them, a young woman named Sasha, took charge. Hypothermia onset. Pulse slow, BP dropping. Pupils reactive but barely. We need to heat her core now. Paul stepped back, breath fogging. She was out here maybe 20 minutes. Rex found her. Sasha glanced at the dog, then back at Edna. That dog saved her life. They loaded Edna onto a stretcher, wrapping her in thermal blankets, inserting IV lines with practiced speed. One of the medics pulled a foil blanket from his kit and crouched beside Rex. For him, too. Rex blinked, barely moved, but his tail thumped once in the snow. Paul placed a hand on his old partner's side. "You did it," he said quietly. "You found her." As they lifted Edna, something slipped from her grasp. Paul bent to pick it up. A photo, sealed in plastic, barely bigger than a playing card. An old black-and-white image of Edna and a man in uniform, her late husband. He remembered now. She had shown him once, years ago. Said her husband had served too. That scarf had been his. Paul slid the photo into her pocket as they loaded her into the ambulance. Sasha called back. "She's not out of the woods, but she has a chance. Thanks to you. And him." As the vehicle doors shut, Paul turned to Rex. The dog stood slowly, legs stiff, but his eyes were bright. Alive. Jerome watched, amazed. "That's one hell of a dog," Paul nodded. He always was. But as the lights faded down the road, Paul felt a weight in his chest. Relief? Yes. Gratitude. But something else, too. Rex had pushed himself beyond what anyone expected. Maybe beyond what his body could safely handle. He had done the job. But at what cost? That night, the house was silent, except for the ticking of an old wall clock and the low hum of the radiator. Paul sat on the floor beside Rex's bed, hand resting lightly on the dog's side. Rex was curled tightly, breathing slow but labored. His body, once built for bursts of speed and brute endurance, now trembled even at rest. Paul had carried him in from the car. It had not been pride or stubbornness that made Rex run like that. It was purpose. But now the toll was showing. Paul had wrapped him in blankets, rubbed his paws warm, even laid his old K9 badge beside him, the one Rex had worn proudly for 7 years. But the look in Rex's eyes worried him. He looked faded, distant. He had seen it before, in soldiers, in partners, in dogs too noble to ask for help. Paul rose, poured warm water into a bowl, crushed some treats softly inside, and set it down near Rex's nose. "Come on, old boy. You earned it." Rex blinked slowly but did not move. Outside, snow had stopped. A moonlit hush settled over the neighborhood, making everything feel distant, dreamlike. Paul checked his phone again. Still no word from the hospital. He considered calling, but something inside him resisted. As if not hearing meant things were still okay. He went back to the living room, sat on the edge of the couch, eyes heavy. His mind drifted to the first day he met Rex. Just a pup back then. Ears too big. Eyes too sharp. No one had expected him to pass selection so quickly. But he did. Rex never needed second chances. He always knew the job. Now, in this quiet, the cost of that job had come due. A soft sound made Paul turn. Rex had tried to stand. His front legs straightened, but his back legs trembled, buckled. He fell back with a soft grunt. Paul was beside him instantly. Hey, easy!" He knelt, supporting Rex's body, feeling how cold his paws still were. His coat had thinned over the years. Age was catching up. "You're not going anywhere tonight," Paul whispered. "You already did enough." Rex looked up at him, eyes wet, ears barely twitching. Then, with effort, He pressed his nose into Paul's palm, just once, and rested his head back down. Paul sat beside him for a long time, legs folded, hand still resting on that graying fur. Then the phone buzzed. A message. Edna stable. Core temp rising. She woke up. First thing she asked. The dog. Paul exhaled. He placed the phone down and looked at Rex. She made it, he said softly. You got her back. Rex did not move. But Paul swore. He saw the faintest wag of the tail. Then nothing. Just quiet. Just breath. Paul did not sleep that night. He stayed by Rex's side, watching the rise and fall of his chest, wondering what tomorrow would bring, and if Rex had enough left in him for it. Morning came in slow, gray streaks through the frosted windows. The world outside was hushed under a fresh blanket of snow, untouched and quiet. Paul opened his eyes, stiff from sleeping on the floor, his back pressed against the couch. He had not meant to fall asleep, not with Rex so still beside him. His first thought was fear. He turned quickly. Rex was breathing, shallow but steady. His eyes were closed, his ears relaxed. The foil blanket Paul had tucked around him had slipped down during the night, revealing his badge once more. That small piece of metal now dulled, edges worn smooth by time and duty. Paul smiled faintly and adjusted the blanket. There was something sacred about mornings after a rescue, the weight of survival settling in, the fragile calm after chaos. But this one felt heavier, more fragile. The hero was still fighting his own battle. The phone buzzed again, a text from the hospital. Vitals steady. Edna's alert. She remembers everything. Says the dog's face is the last thing she saw before it all went dark. Paul exhaled and looked at Rex. You hear that? She remembers you. Rex stirred slightly, one paw twitching as if running in his dreams. Paul let his hand rest on Rex's ribs, the rise and fall slower now. He knew what that meant. The body was working hard. Every part of him had been pushed beyond its limit yesterday. There were things no X-ray could capture. The cost of choosing to run, to save, to matter, even when the world had already called you retired. The doorbell rang. Paul blinked, startled. He opened it to find Jerome, the mailman, standing there, holding a folded piece of paper. Thought I'd check in, Jerome said. Been thinking about him all night. And her. How's he doing? Paul stepped aside to let him in. Hanging on, tired. But he made it. Jerome walked slowly into the living room, then crouched beside Rex. Hey, buddy. You're a legend on my route now. Brought something. He unfolded the paper. It was a printed photo, a still frame from one of the ambulance's body cams. It showed Rex, lying beside Edna in the snow, head on her shoulder, eyes locked to hers. Behind them, Paul's shadow and the scarf, the bright red slash in a white world. I figured you might want to keep it, Jerome said. Paul took the photo, throat tight. He nodded silently. Take care of him, Jerome added. Dogs like that, they only come once. When Jerome left, Paul pinned the photo to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a bone. He looked at it a long time. That scarf, that stare, that dog. Later that afternoon, Paul carried Rex outside briefly, bundled in his arms like he was a pup again. He let him feel the air, see the snow he had conquered, smell the wind. Rex rested his head against Paul's arm. For a moment, they just stood there. And Paul wondered if this was the last winter they would share. How many lives had been changed because Rex refused to stay inside? The next few days passed in slow motion. Edna remained stable in the hospital, recovering inch by inch. Word of her rescue spread quickly through town. Neighbors left flowers on her porch. A local paper ran a short headline. Retired K9 saves elderly woman from snowy collapse. But for Paul, the outside world had gone quiet. His focus was on Rex. The dog had not stood since that night. He drank water, ate a few softened bites, but each movement came slower than the last. Paul kept him warm, massaged his joints, played quiet radio just like they used to during long stakeouts. But the fire behind Rex's eyes had dimmed. Paul knew that look. It was not pain, it was peace, the kind that comes only when a job has been finished. That afternoon, Paul carried Rex again, this time to the backyard. The snow had thinned slightly, the sun melting patches near the porch. Paul set Rex down gently on a blanket. Rex sniffed the wind, ears twitching. Paul sat beside him, wrapping them both in a second quilt. "I used to think you were indestructible," Paul whispered. Rex blinked slowly. "You never missed a scent trail. Never gave up. And even now you're still teaching me something." The wind shifted. A soft flurry lifted through the trees. For a moment, Paul imagined what it must have looked like from Rex's view. That splash of red in the snow, that slumped shape, the silence of danger, and the choice to act. No orders, no handler's voice, just instinct, loyalty, love. Paul pulled something from his coat pocket. The badge. The metal was cold in his hand. He reached forward and clipped it gently to Rex's collar, the way it had once hung in every mission they ever worked. "You wore this for years," Paul said. "And yesterday, you earned it all over again." Rex closed his eyes. His breathing was slower now, but steady. He rested his chin on Paul's leg, a quiet sigh escaping his chest. Later that evening, the phone rang. It was Edna. Her voice was weak, but clear. "He saved me," Paul smiled. "He did. I saw him," she said. "Not just his face, his eyes. He looked like he knew me." "He did," Paul replied. "He knows people like you. Please tell him." "Thank you," Paul swallowed. "I will." After the call, Paul sat beside Rex's bed once more. He showed him the phone. That was her. "She's okay. She remembers. She's grateful." Rex blinked once, then closed his eyes again. That night, as snow whispered against the windows, Paul sat in silence. The red scarf was still on the table, and every time Paul looked at it, he saw not the rescue, but the dog who made the decision to try. By morning, the world outside had turned to glass. A thin layer of ice coated the sidewalks, the trees, even the windows, bending light in strange and beautiful ways. Paul stood in the kitchen, staring at the photograph Jerome had brought, the one now pinned to the fridge. Rex and Edna, frozen in time, tethered by that single moment, that red scarf, that choice. Behind him, Rex still rested in his bed. He had not moved through the night. Paul approached slowly, crouching down. "Morning, partner," he said gently. Rex opened his eyes, just barely. His breathing was slow, shallow. Every rise of his chest seemed to take effort now. But he was there, still here, still holding on. Paul sat beside him again, hand resting on the dog's ribs, counting the seconds between breaths. He felt the urge to say something more, something final, but the words caught in his throat. How do you speak a goodbye to someone who never asked for anything in return? The badge still hung from Rex's collar. Paul's fingers brushed it softly. "You were the best I ever worked with," he whispered. "You gave your life for people who never even knew your name. And you never needed a reason, you just did it." The clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere down the street, a child shouted. The sound of a sled hitting pavement, laughter echoing. Life continued, unaware, unmoved. Paul remembered the way Rex used to wait by the door every morning, ready to work. Tail wagging, body still. His alertness was never forced. It was purpose woven into muscle and instinct, the kind of loyalty no training could create. The house phone rang once. Paul ignored it. Instead, he knelt lower, his forehead resting gently against Rex's. "You can rest now," he murmured. "That was your last command." Rex let out one slow breath. And then, nothing. No sound. No struggle. Just stillness. Paul stayed there, unmoving, his hand on that badge, his eyes closed. Later that day, the snow began to melt again, slowly and quietly. The red scarf, still on the table, caught the breeze from the cracked window and fluttered to the floor. Paul did not pick it up. He left it there, resting beside Rex's empty bed, a symbol not of loss, but of everything Rex chose to carry, and everything he chose to give. 1 week later, the sun finally broke through. It painted long golden lines across the living room floor, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the quiet. Paul stood in front of the fireplace, holding Rex's badge in his hand. The collar was beside it. Clean now, the tag polished, the metal warm from his palm. The house felt empty. No paw taps on the wood, no quiet sighs from a corner, no weight beside him during coffee. Just memory. But it was everywhere. The blanket still laid folded by the back door. The leash hung silently on its hook, and the red scarf, now framed, sat on the mantel beneath a small bronze plaque. Rex, K9, Yaramzro 42. Protector, partner, hero. You never stopped serving, not even once. That morning, Paul made one final stop. He drove slowly, passing neighbors who nodded with quiet respect. The story had touched more people than he expected. A retired dog, forgotten by most, had reminded the town what devotion looked like. At the hospital, Edna was already waiting at the window. She waved as Paul entered her room, bundled in a knitted shawl, her smile faint but full of light. "I owe you everything," she whispered. Paul shook his head. "Not me." He placed a small frame on her bedside table. The same photograph Jerome had taken. The red scarf, the snow, Rex beside her, eyes locked to hers. She reached for it with shaking hands. "You know," she said quietly, "when I was out there, I remember thinking, this is it. I was sure of it. And then, his face, his eyes." Paul sat beside her. He never gave up on people. She looked at the photo again. How many of us can say that? They sat in silence for a while. Two lives that had been saved in different ways by the same soul. Before he left, Paul reached into his coat pocket and handed her something else. It was the red scarf. "I thought it might belong here," he said. She held it against her chest like a blanket, eyes wet with memory. That night, Paul returned home. He stepped into the quiet, placed Rex's collar beside the badge on the mantel, and lit a single candle beneath them both. He stood for a long time, letting the silence settle. Then, for the first time in days, he stepped out the door and walked. Not with a leash, not with a mission, but with memory at his side. And as the last snow melted beneath his boots, he understood. Some rescues are loud, but others, the most powerful ones, happen in silence, and they stay with you forever. If this story moved you, share it with someone who believes dogs never truly retire. They just wait for their next rescue. Subscribe for more unforgettable stories like Rex's.